Hello everybody and welcome to the Holistic Growth Show, where it is my aim to equip students with essential skills that, for some reason, aren't taught in schools. My name is Tim Evertse and I hope you enjoy the show. So today we are talking about exam revision techniques. Now, funny enough, you would assume that schools would teach this sorts of things, but unfortunately they don't. But I mean, look, this is what I'm here for. I'm here to empower students, and I'm here to help you guys however much I can to give you guys the skills that you need to survive. And if exam revision techniques is one of them, then I believe that that's what I'm meant to do. So I've got some notes over here just to make sure I cover everything. So for me, there's 4 stages of the exam process. You have, not the exam process, but rather the exam revision process. You have the note-taking stage, you have the understanding stage, you have the testing yourself stage, and you have the not forgetting stage. And all along that line, you are trying to make the process fun, and you are trying to make the process enjoyable. The reason why you're doing so is so that you can be motivated to do studying. And the more motivated you are to study, the more likely you are to do it, and it just makes things better for everybody. So those are 5 key aspects, I think: note-taking, understanding, testing yourself, not forgetting, and making sure the process is fun. So let's start at the beginning. What is note-taking? Note-taking would be consuming the information that you receive during class, during lectures, during any sort of teaching session. So there are 2 types of subjects that you get. You have the theory subjects and you have your technical subjects. Now, this is all according to Cal Newport's book, How to Be a Straight A Student. You can find it online, or maybe it's at your local library. So you have your theory subjects and you have your technical subjects. Theory subjects would be things like biology, things like chemistry, things like literature, history, geography, those sorts of subjects. And then you have your technical subjects. Now, technical subjects would be things like mathematics, things like accounting, things like IT, things like languages. So I know for South Africans, Afrikaans and Xhosa, those are like 2 languages that I do, and so you study those through through technical means. You have to practice to get better at it. And so when it comes to the theory subjects, how do you take notes for theory subjects? Well, you have the QEC method. QEC as in question, evidence, and conclusion. And so I'll explain what the QEC method is, and I'll explain how I use it. So a good example of the QEC method is actually, if you think about, let's say the question is, are the Springboks the best rugby team of all time, right? And so that's the question. Now you look for evidence. And so the evidence will be, okay, maybe they won 3 World Cups, they are consistent in their team, and they win most of their games. Let's say those hypothetically are the evidence. Is the evidences, or are the evidences? English is not Englishing right now. And so those are the evidences, and then you have your conclusion, and your conclusion links back to the question. Now the conclusion will be, yes, Springboks are the best rugby team of all time. And so that's how the QEC method works. So for me, the QEC method I actually use a lot in my essay planning. So if I'm writing a literature essay on something like Hamlet or something like Life of Pi, I will have a mind map of just maybe Life of Pi, and so then I will have 10 different topics under Life of Pi. Maybe it's the topic of the color orange, maybe it's the topic of Richard Parker, it could be the topic of anything really. And so, or any sort of questions that could come up, like for example, what does the color orange symbolize? What is Richard Parker's role in the story? Maybe something like Pi's relationship with religion, whatever the case may be. whatever questions, and then I would list my evidences in that manner. And so then I would have on a piece of paper, then I would have 10 topics and all the evidences for that topic, for those topics. And so then that would go into my studying section, and then that would be my notes on Life of Pi. And so the other ways that I study theory subjects would be, I use a lot of flashcards, I use a lot of flow diagrams. Flow diagrams would be for processes, so things like meiosis, or things like the reproductive process, or things like photosynthesis. Those will all be done in flow diagrams. I use annotated diagrams. Annotated diagrams will be things like the cell, things like the nervous system, whatever needs to be annotated diagrams. I would use those, and so you would have my annotated diagrams, as in you have a diagram and then you make labels, and on the labels you mention everything from the functions, structures, all those sorts of things. And then I would use tables as well. Now tables would be to compare different things. So let's say we have different types of microorganisms, things like bacteria, you would have viruses, you would have fungi, and you would have protista. And then you would compare and you'd say, okay, fine, what's the structure of bacteria? What's the structure of protista? Those sort of things. You have structure, then you would have function, then you would have how, maybe you have treatments, maybe you'd have what causes them to exist, and so you would compare everything that way. And so those are some of the methods that I would use personally for like things like biology, things like literature, and so on and so forth. And then flashcards, I use that often, but I will get to that when it comes to the testing yourself stage. So that's theory subjects. You have the QEC method, you have annotated diagrams, you have flow diagrams, you have tables, and flashcards, which I will get to in just a second. And then you have, for your technical subjects, the best way to take notes on those is just to write down examples and do as many practice questions like that. That's the only way to get better at it, because the whole thing is based on process. And if you can mark down where the marks go, or what will get what you get marked on, or what you get points for, I think that's probably a good idea. And then also, to help with the understanding of the note taking, you want to figure out everything from first principles. Now what that means is that figure out how the building blocks of a particular topic can connect together. And so if you take something like geometry, you would have you'd have fuzzy X, which is like your different parallel lines and your different straight lines, and what the different diagrams mean. And so then you build that up to get to something like the midpoint theorem. Then you use the midpoint theorem and triangles and congruency, and you build that up to get to your circle geometry. And so you can figure out and understand how from first principles, how something can be built up. Taking notes in that manner can be very powerful when you're studying. Now moving on to the understanding phase. And so once you've taken down the notes and you've consumed the notes that you have, understanding, a great way to test understanding is whether you can regurgitate that, and in a way that shows you understand it, basically. And so a great way to test your understanding is actually something called the Feynman technique. And so the idea behind the Feynman technique is that you explain it to a 4-year-old, and maybe not necessarily going to a literal 4-year-old and explaining a concept, but the idea is that you don't use jargon, and that you're also always able to answer the question of why. Because a 4-year-old is always going to ask you, why? So let's take plants, for example. If a 4-year-old was to ask me, how do plants survive? I would say, because of photosynthesis. And so they would say, why? That's because, okay, what's photosynthesis? And I explain what photosynthesis is. And they would maybe ask, why does photosynthesis happen? And I would say, so that the plant could survive, whatever. And yeah, so as you can tell, I can't remember much about plants, you can tell. But yeah, that's the idea. The idea is that you would often go and say, a child's always going to ask more and more questions, a 4-year-old especially. And so as you are answering more and more questions, you are going to a deeper and deeper layer. And that way it's testing how much you know. And when you reach a point where you don't know something, then you know, okay, that's the thing that I need to study. That's the thing that I need to test myself on. That's the Feynman technique. And all in all, I feel that's a great way to test your understanding. And yes, you don't need to really go to a actual 5-year-old. You don't need to go to a person to go and explain this, to go and explain a concept that you're studying. You can even just explain it to yourself. You can open up a text document, or maybe you can take out a piece of paper and you can just write down the entire concept. And if there's something that you don't that you can't explain really well, and so you try and explain whenever there's jargon, things like photosynthesis, things like meiosis, things like photogenesis, whatever the term or jargon may be, if you can explain a concept without using the jargon, then that's a great way to know whether you can study or not, whether you understand the topic or not. And if you don't understand it, then that's where you know, okay, I need to study this part of the concept, I need to study that part of the concept. So all in all, I think the Feynman technique is actually a great way of testing your understanding. Before we continue, I'd like to pause for a second. Think about one person who could benefit from this episode. It could be a friend, a family member, a partner, or a peer. Please share this episode with them and encourage them to listen to it. It'll be a huge help to them. And now, back to the show. And speaking of testing yourself, we now get to the active recall stage. Now, what is active recall? Active recall is when you actively are testing yourself, because the only way to get better at answering questions is by testing yourself over and over and over and over. What are ways that you can test yourself? Well, there are two main ways that I do this. I use flashcards and I use past papers. Now, why do I use flashcards? Flashcards are there to help me understand the finer detail of something. So when I'm taking notes, sometimes I will make a mind map, and the mind map I will use to create summaries of the notes so that I can understand the broad picture of how everything fits together within the top. However, the flashcards will be there for the finer details. And so if we're talking about microorganisms, it'll be things like the specific functions of each microorganism, the specific structure behind each microorganism, things like the processes behind how each microorganism can reproduce. Those will be the finer details that I'll have. And I usually don't use physical flashcards. I will actually just use digital flashcards. And there are two apps that I would recommend. The one is Quizlet. That's like quiz and let put together, spelled Quizlet. And you can make your own flashcards. And oftentimes when you're on your mobile phone or your smartphone, you can create those sets yourself. And what I will just do, I will just write like a ton of questions on the topic, and so put all those questions in, and then put all the answers in, and then just test yourself over and over and over and over. Eventually, when you get those questions in the exam, you know exactly what the answer is. And so that's how I test myself with flashcards. And I also test myself with past papers. Now, there are two sites that you can go to find proper past papers. You can have testpapers.com, or you can go to saexampapers.co.za. That's where I find the majority of all my past papers for all my subjects. I do 3 languages, I do double science, and I do maths and AP maths. And so that's where I get most of my past papers. And also, if you're looking for AP math papers but you can't find any, you can go to Synthetians. Synthetians spelled Stithians. Synthetians. And you will just search that, and then you'll find if you go to Synthetians past papers, you can search that, you can go to the link, and then you can usually search on this site and it will say FS exam papers or AP maths past papers, and you can find proper past papers there. And so those are 2 ways that I use active recall. And so oftentimes I will take the questions in the exams and I will put them onto my flashcards. And so I will use those questions on my flashcards, and I will use those exact memo answers on my flashcards, and that's how I learn to memorize things. And the great thing is about digital flashcards that you can make them as big as you want. So you can put on entire paragraphs onto your flashcards, and you can just learn through them over and over and over and over, and eventually you'll get through it and you know the entire topic of your art. And now we've come to the not forgetting stage. So after you have taken your notes, after you have made sure you understand the topic completely, once you have tested yourself over and over, you're now at the not forgetting stage. So now the not forgetting stage is not just about testing yourself, but now it's also about testing yourself at specific intervals. The reason why testing yourself over and over and doing it at regular intervals is really important is because your brain can learn to just retain information. And your brain, when it comes to your brain retaining information, it's sort of like a muscle. The more you use it, the easier it becomes to retain information. The first few times it will be difficult. The first few times where you test yourself over and over, it's going to be difficult. But after a while, it gets easier. And that's the good thing. And so spaced repetition, the idea of the not forgetting stage, is built behind spaced repetition. And spaced repetition is just about the intervals that you are using, the regular intervals that you are using to test yourself. There are 3 ways that I use spaced repetition. There's a popular biology teacher by the name of Miss Angler, and she recommends the 2-3-5-7 method, which is actually something that I use, and I found it really helpful. So the idea is that you look at your exam days. And so let's say your exam is on a particular day, right? So now you know, okay, 2-3-5-7. 2 days before the exam, that's when you study. Then 3 days before that day, you study. So 5 days all in all before your exam. Then 5 days before that day, you study. And so now you are 10 days all in all before your exam. And then 7 days before that day, you study. And so now you are about, I think, 17 days before your exam. Sorry, the maths isn't mathing anymore. But yeah, so at those regular intervals, you start studying, and once you study, and if you study at those intervals, you will find that your brain is working harder and harder to retain the information, and over time it just gets easier and easier to retain the concept. So that's the 2-3-5-7 method. Don't tell anyone, but sometimes when I've slacked on studying and I only have a week left of studying, I will just study 7 days before my exam, then 5 days before my exam, then 3 days before my exam, and 2 days before my exam. And I find that it works just as well for me. But yeah, don't tell anyone, even though I'm saying that on a podcast. So next way that you can practice spaced repetition is what we call interleaving. Now, this is something that I use a lot and I find it really helpful. So interleaving is actually what you can do on one day. If you have one studying day, you can do interleaving. Let's say you're studying topic A, then you study topic B, and then you study topic A again, then you study topic C, and then you study B, and then you study A again. Notice how when you study those A's, you study topic A over and over and over on the same studying session, your brain is working harder and harder because you would have studied a different topic, but then trying to remember the previous topic. So when your brain is working harder like that, sure, it's difficult, but the more difficult it is now, the better it is in the tests or in the exam, and you are able to remember things a lot easier. And so that's interleaving. And so what I will maybe do, I'll maybe study maths the morning, then I will study Afrikaans after that, then I'll study maths again in the afternoon, then I'll study Xhosa, and then I'll study maths again in the evening, and I will find that I'm able to retain the information a lot better. Those are actually what we call prospective revision methods. And so another method that I found recently that was actually inspired by Ali Abdaal, you can search him on YouTube, he's quite popular there. He's got his method called the retrospective revision timetable. Instead of the prospective revision timetable, he has the retrospective revision timetable. So what does prospective mean? Prospective means you're looking at your calendar ahead and you're saying, okay, on this day, on this day, on this day, on this day, I'm going to be studying X, Y, and Z. And the problem with that is that you have no control over what's going to happen on that day. Something might happen and you have to skip your studying. The plan could go completely askew, and then it'll just be a lot more difficult to catch up with your studying. Whereas instead of looking ahead and trying to pick your studying days, you can actually look back. And so retrospective revision timetable, let's say I need to study DNA, nerves, muscles, kidneys, and bacteria, right? Those 5 topics. Let's say I need to study those. And so I'll look at my retrospective revision timetable and I will say, okay, I did a test on all 5 of these topics. And so I figured that if I'm giving it a rating of 1 to 3, 1 being really bad and 3 being really good. Let's say I give DNA a 3, nerves a 2, muscles a 2, kidneys a 1, and bacteria a 1. Right? So now I look at DNA and I look at DNA today and I say, okay, look, DNA is a 3, but kidneys and bacteria are 1s. So I'm going to study kidneys and I'm going to study bacteria. Now, DNA is a 3, nerves is 2, muscles is 2, kidneys is now 2, and bacteria is now 2. Now I say, okay, I've done kidneys and bacteria, but I haven't done the nerves and muscles in a while. So the next day, I wake up and I say, okay, I haven't done nerves and muscles in a while because I'm looking back at what I have studied. So I said, okay, I haven't done nerves and muscles in a while, so I'm going to study nerves and muscles today. Now, nerves and muscles is 3. And now the next day. Now I look at my table again, and I see DNA is a 3, nerves and muscles are 3, and kidneys and bacteria are at a 2. So I say, okay, look, kidneys and bacteria are my weakest because they're still 2, as everything else is 3, so I'm going to study that again today. Once I study those, now everything is 3. Now I'd see, okay, I didn't study DNA in a long time, so I'm going to study DNA today. And so that way you just go through, and the emphasis is that you start studying the things that you are difficult at or the things that you struggle with. It just helps you to maximize your marks and helps you to maximize your studying potential. Now, remember, while doing all of these things, while doing good note-taking, good understanding, testing yourself regularly, and doing it regularly, all the while, you are trying to make the process fun. And why you want to make the process fun is because you want to make it sustainable for yourself and you want to make it enjoyable for yourself so that you are more motivated and more likely to do it. So what are ways that you can make studying fun or make your studying sessions fun? So the 4 ways that I do these things are, 1, you can do it with other people. So find your friends, go make a Discord server, hop on the Discord server and say, okay, we are going to be studying whatever subject today, and we are going to put on the music and we're just going to study all in the same group. Or you can just be testing each other. You can say, okay, one person gets the flashcards and then we can all be testing each other and we can make it like a game and we can see, okay, who has the most knowledge on this topic, and then we can see, okay, like who's first place, who's second place, who's third place. You can make it fun. You can make it like a game. And so that way you're more motivated to learn more and to study more. The next thing you can do is just do your style, whatever you like. Maybe there's certain colors that you like when you're making your notes. You use those colors. If you maybe prefer self-study over studying with people, then you study by yourself. If you prefer using tutors, and so you can have a physical tutor, or sorry, not a physical tutor, but a tutor in real life, or that you are in close proximity with, or you can use online tutors. And there are thousands of online platforms of people who do maths, physics, biology. You can follow people like Miss Angler. You can follow Thatmathsteacher. You can follow Kevinmathscience, and all sorts of people. Just search on YouTube, and the internet is filled with digital tutors that will help you. The other thing I do is I try to lower the bar. So what I mean by that is just the emphasis is just to make studying easier to do. And so instead of saying, okay, look, if I have topics 1 to 10, and I say, all right, instead of doing all 10 topics, I'm just going to get 3 done today. It just makes things easier, and it convinces me that the studying will be easier. And if I'm convinced that the studying will be easier, it's more likely that I will do the easier thing than to do the more difficult thing of doing 10 topics. And yeah, that's how you can make studying fun. And so now we come to the end of our show, and if you stuck all the way through my ramblings, I'm really grateful. Let me know what you thought of it. You can reach out to me on most social media platforms. I will leave a link to them in the description. You can leave a comment, leave a like, and leave a good review or a good rate. And yeah, let me know what you thought. And once again, please do reach out. I am a people's person and I do love making connections. And yeah, if you like this, let me know. And yeah, have a lush one.